You're listening to Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. Criticaleye is a global membership community with over 2 decades of experience supporting senior executives in their roles. We work with board-level executives, giving them opportunities to build their knowledge, skills, and access independent reference points outside of their immediate networks. Whether you're stepping up into a more senior role or aspiring to do so, looking to hone high-level stakeholder relationships, drive operational performance, build your own personal resilience as a leader, or have longer-term career goals such as moving into a plural career, Criticaleye's approach supports a range of leadership challenges and ambitions.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. I'm Bridgette Hall, Senior Editor here at Criticaleye, and I'm delighted to be hosting this discussion on the CPO lens on what's shaping the leaders of tomorrow. In this episode, we'll explore the leadership trends shaping executive teams today, from high-performance mindsets and then the CEO, CPO, CFO dynamics, to the board's role in developing leaders. We discuss how to build capability, navigate tensions, and prepare for the leaders of tomorrow. I'm delighted to be joined by 2 excellent guests, Jodene Young, who is the CPO at the National Physical Laboratory, and Andrew Darfoor, Vice Chair and Senior Independent Director at the Post Office, amongst a couple of other roles, but I'll let you get into that. Welcome, both of you. I'm so happy to have you. And like I said, maybe, Andrew, feel free to build out your introduction more and your background. And then I guess my first question to both of you, and we'll start with you, Andrew, is what leadership trends do you think is really shaping executive teams the most right now? And then we'll take it.
Well, thanks, Bridgette, for having me. As far as my background, mostly financial services as an executive, where I ran insurance, asset management, pensions businesses in across 3 continents. And more recently, in my non-exec career, a range of businesses that I either sit on the board or chair. So coming to your question around trends in terms of executive leadership, I think the perspective I would offer is that given the pace of change today, whether it's technology or geopolitical environments, the one area leaders have to be very good at is being adaptive. So I would say that adaptive leadership is a big skill that leaders have to simply focus on. And the other one is, I call creating psychological safety. So whether that's employee well-being or employee health, you want to create a safe space for employees to feel valued as they navigate the new world, which has fundamentally changed since COVID. So those are some of my reflections that we can get into much more depth if we want to.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Jodene? And also feel free to tell us a bit more about your background and your role at National Physics Laboratory. And what trends do you see kind of shaping the world right now?
Thanks, Bridgette. So I've been at the National Physical Laboratory for almost 20 years. It has gone on quite a journey in terms of both culture change, but also growth, doubling in size in the last 7 or 8 years. And as I listened to Andrew speak, I would absolutely echo the adaptive leadership. It's something that I have seen a lot of, and just hot on the heels of refreshing our operating model and an executive restructure. One of the things that has really characterised our thinking is the need to respond at pace to change. And the thing that I was going to comment on in relation to that was this need to be able to move at a completely different pace and to challenge existing kind of governance mechanisms, the cadence of decision making, and to really sort of start to explore more of an asynchronous pattern. And leaders, I think, are so often stuck in a historical way of doing things that it requires quite the character to break down those ways of working and to really challenge that to deliver positive outcomes. And the other thing that I was going to comment on was the need for emotional intelligence. So our best leaders, we are seeing be able to understand the impact they have on others, positive and negative, and to fine-tune that and to turn the dial in a different direction depending on the circumstances. So to really think about how they might inspire others so that they can achieve results through them, as well as taking a real enterprise mindset and that enterprise mindset, being concerned not just with their functional expertise or the performance of the thing they're responsible for, but being concerned with the whole organisation and how that organisation delivers.
Yeah, that links very much to your point around psychological safety, because I don't think you can have that without the EQ that you were talking about. Given that, how would you describe now like high performance, like a high performing business? I think you guys went quite into detail there around the characteristics of a leader, but what do you think high performance in an organization looks like in the next 5 years?
Sure. So I think the stereotypical definition of high performance was all about achieving targets historically. And I think right now that's essentially shifted to, can you demonstrate resilience? Can you create value? Can you navigate through disruption? So certainly the boards I sit on, we evaluate leaders on their ability to handle challenges, their ability to be adaptive, and their ability to lead the organization in the face of rapid technology, geopolitical change. And I think that requires, to what Jodene said earlier, it requires sound judgment, confidence, EQ, resilience. Those weren't skills that people valued in the past. But I think increasingly now people have to value those skills.
Yeah, I think the sound judgment is pivotal, and I recognise the connections between those different characteristics you just described. I think for me that often manifests in the form of strong communication. So what we genuinely see is leaders who are able to connect with individuals, not on a one-to-one basis, that's not practical, especially if you're working in a large organisation, but to establish a connection through effective communication that is designed and tailored to the needs of the people that they are talking to, be that your senior stakeholders, be it your customers, or be it your staff. I think that is a measure of real success and high performance in a leader. But I also think the ability in this environment of constant change to pivot, so not to be wedded to something that one set out to do at the beginning of the calendar year or the financial year, and to understand that the sand has shifted and to respond accordingly and to change direction and to be content with and energized by changing direction feels like the quality of a high performing leader to me.
And it's interesting when you think about it, because how do you sustain trust with the organization, with the board, in a period of uncertainty? Because you clearly do not have all the answers. And so how do you maintain trust? And I think leaders that are able to sustain and generate trust whilst managing through uncertainty are the ones who will survive. And you do that by being authentic, and you do that by allowing people to trust you. So you've got to show vulnerability. The CEOs of 20, 30 years ago, it was actually a weakness to show vulnerability. Now it's an absolute requirement to build trust.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. What about the tensions that kind of naturally arise between cost, growth, and then culture? How do you navigate that at the C-suite? Jodene, if you have a view?
Sure, I do. I feel like this is my day-to-day existence, and I think those three things are always there. They're constant, and I think the mistake that is often made is to consider a trade-off between them, when actually it's about finding a healthy tension between them and making that really sing for you. So one of the things that we toy with quite a lot at the moment at the National Physical Laboratory in the executive discussions is how it's possible to achieve growth whilst saving cost. So, and depending on your environment and your kind of funding structures, this will be more or less important, but it is always there. And there is the thought to kind of turn one's attention to switching off low value activity, because actually so often there will be fat in the system and there will be opportunities to improve and to refine the way of doing things that can introduce cost saving whilst also creating a platform for growth. So I think there's something about but observing both of those two things and considering how you can create one with the other. And I guess what I'd also say is, for me, culture is that kind of golden thread that runs through it all. So if you take your eye off culture, then you'll naturally run into trouble. But equally, there's something about, in doing those things I've just described, so in seeking opportunities to cut out low value activity, you're both likely to inspire and energize your workforce. You know, they don't want to be doing stuff that doesn't add value, but also you're likely to create growth and the behaviors associated with growth by setting that tone.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree 100% with that. I mean, I think it's almost the perfect triangle when you think about it. You've got growth, cost, culture, and they compete with each other. So, for instance, growth requires investment, cost demands efficiency, culture builds trust. So tension rises when one of those areas is out of equilibrium. So how do you get right into the middle of the triangle? And I think that's the theme. And ultimately, it's all about an effective partnership between the board, the chief executive, the CFO, the CPO, and leadership. They've got to be aligned. And only when you get absolute alignment do you get transparency and better decisions. Now, it's easier said in theory than in reality. And most organizations have not got this right, will not get this right. But you've got to start off with a mindset that we've got to think about how we work together on this.
Yeah, it's what you mentioned, the triangle, and I was gonna ask you, what about that relationship between the CEO, CPO, CFO? In your case, with the board, which is more of a square, I would say. But maybe if you do have any examples of that really working well in practice, and then I'd love to hear how you approach that, Jodene.
Yeah. So I am very lucky that I work with a CEO and a CFO where there is real strategic alignment. But I think it's interesting that this question gets posed, because I think there is an assumption there, and perhaps a stereotype, that your CFO is the one concerned with costs, your CPO is the one concerned with culture, and your CEO is the one concerned with growth. But that's not, well, to my mind, that isn't necessarily what a high-performing and effective executive committee or structure does or focuses on. So I think a great CPO is absolutely about ambition and about growth, and they are concerned, yes, with cost, but perhaps they're bringing the creativity to how you might phase growth and how you might deliver through alternative means, or you might break things down and prioritize different aspects of your growth plans, think about it in a different way. So that might be where you see a CPO sort of adding value to that kind of natural sort of tension between those three themes. And actually, back to that kind of relationship, a really aligned CFO, CPO, CFO relationship. You have the CFO really sort of seeing culture and change management as a value driver. So they're not seeing it just as a cost, but something that represents value and aids the kind of development of the organisation. And then, of course, a strong CEO is listening and listening really hard to those different tensions and creating that sort of balanced judgment with the assistance and with the partnering that exists between the three.
Yeah, I agree. To me, it's all about making sure that decisions are made together. Decisions are unified. And in making that unity, you're considering all elements, whether it's the financial element, the talent element, the capability element, but it's a unified decision from the management team. And that's not easy to get right. So I think you've got to create the right trust environment where, I always say it's okay to object without being objectionable. So how do you create an environment where you can disagree with each other, have a positive discussion, but align? Because I think the best discussions often happen when different vantage points come towards a decision. And you actually know you've tested it from multiple lenses. So I don't think the competing challenges of cost, growth, or culture, I don't think we should be shy that tension does exist. The question is, how do you align on decisions around that?
Yeah. linked to that, what role do you see for the chair or the board in kind of executive development, and how they can kind of challenge executives in ways that build capability and strengthen the leadership team, rather than destabilize it? Because, like you mentioned, their challenge is so important.
Yeah, so, certainly the boards I either sit on or chair, the role of the board for me is the long-term custodian of the organization. So you've got to think about the organizational capability, not just for today, but for 3, 5, 10 years plus in terms of the direction you want the organization to go. So I always ask the question, if you had all the money in the world and you could invest in anything you wanted to, what would it be? And getting that answer is actually quite important, because it tells you whether you're thinking about long-term or short-term. And for me, it's all about the organizational capability you're building that can outlast you. So how do you create an organization that's responsive to the needs of today, but also make sure it's got the skill set needed to succeed in the future, and you're creating the right environment for that? So ultimately, I think that's where a board has to focus on, in ensuring that leadership is aligned with that, and the board's also aligned with that, rather than the short term. Because sometimes boards tend to be quite situational, for good reason if there's a crisis. But beyond that, you've got to think long term.
Well, you stole one of my questions there, because the next one was going to go to Jodene. If you had an unlimited budget for people and leadership development, what would you implement first and why?
I don't need to hesitate when I talk about this, and maybe it will build on what Andrew was saying. We'll see in a minute. But I instinctively, and my gut just told me, coaching. And the reason for that is, when I think about the benefit of coaching, there is something about the pause, the sort of intentional nudging oneself to reconsider, to not base decision making or action on initial judgment, and to get out of your own head and really think about the perspectives and the impact of your actions on others. I really genuinely feel that coaching creates momentum around that sort of set of activities, and it inevitably delivers a better experience for those that interact with leaders. And to your point around the long term, Andrew, I feel like that goes somewhere beyond kind of teaching a skill or imparting a bit of knowledge or wisdom, and somewhere beyond mentoring. And it's about almost the analogy of kind of putting one's face mask on, or building a kind of water well, so that an underdeveloped area is able to kind of thrive in the future. It's something about creating a way of working, a way of behaving, a way of leading that will go on to deliver positive outcomes into the future.
Yeah. Well, this is a fab conversation. I have just maybe one more question for both of you to wrap us up. If you can pick kind of one characteristic, what do you think will distinguish exceptional leaders in the next 5 years? And what leadership capability do you think is currently underestimated? Andrew?
I would say into the future, managing uncertainty whilst building trust. Because you could throw a plethora of challenges or themes into that, but if you can deliver the two, then you're in safe hands. The difficulty in terms of that question will be, how do you do that whilst under pressure? And that comes back to the point of looking after the employees' psychological safety and well-being. And I think we've learnt over recent years how important it is for employees to feel valued, how important it is for people to recognise when people have wellness challenges, and actually don't shy away from dealing with that head on.
Does that resonate with you?
Oh, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. And then perhaps thinking about one of those challenges, which will be a feature of that uncertainty and managing our way through disruption and other influences, is anticipating the future of the workplace and the workforce. So understanding what the children of today will look like as employees of the future, and recognising where we're starting to see themes of there being a void between early careers and later careers. how we create an opportunity for those different generations to connect and join and dovetail in the middle, and understanding that whilst you're leaders who have grown up through business and may have wisdom, but not the kind of fresh perspective of the next generation, but your next generation might not have the lived experience needed in order to make judgments that are going to impact their future of work. It's about bringing those two things together in a complementary way, and I think that's a real skill. It brings us full circle round to emotional intelligence, and also what I would say in terms of a characteristic would be that human connection, which I think runs through pretty much everything we've talked about today, and being able to sort of translate things into future value.
Thank you. What a brilliant way to wrap up the conversation. Thank you both so much for your candor and insights. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode and you would like more Criticaleye content, just like or subscribe on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, or follow us on LinkedIn. Bye for now.